Welcome, I'm Jon Caldara, president of the Independence Institute and your devil's advocate. Later on, we're going to talk a little taxpayer bill of rights, but first, the state has given more local control to localities, so I thought we better talk to those localities to see how they feel about it. Mr. Shelton, how are you?
I'm doing great, John. Thanks for having me.
And introduce yourself, Mr. Councilman from Arvada.
Well, thank you, John. I am John Marriott. I am the mayor pro tem of the city of Arvada.
Love your hotels.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
That's you.
Whenever you check into a Marriott, do they give you a look?
No, but I got free dessert once in the Houston Airport Marriott Hotel. So
really?
Did work out.
Nice, nice. All right. So the progressive takeover of Colorado has a very interesting twist in the last legislative session, which was, no, we're not communists. We're just pushing things down to the local level because we like local control, which is always fun because when a local school board wants to do vouchers, they go crazy. But what are they pushing down to the locals now? And I want to go over some of these subjects because you guys, I guess you could say, are more empowered than ever before, aren't you? And why?
For sure.
Is that a good thing?
Yes, we are. There were maybe 3 or 4 issues. Oil and gas was one, Senate Bill 181, tobacco regulation or vaping, and then minimum wage also. And we had talked about another one. Probably upcoming is
Rent control,
and we have tobacco regulation. So.
All right, so it used to be that all these cities had to abide by the same rules, but now one city can set their minimum wage as high as possible, if they like. Well, don't you guys love this idea? Don't you love this idea?
Well, I'll tell you,
that's a lot of power for you.
It does, and I'll tell you, on one hand, as a small business owner, I absolutely love it because I'm hoping a neighboring city will raise one of my competitors' costs. But from a city standpoint, no, I think having the ability to do it is not bad, but I'll tell you, it really affects who you want representing you on those local city councils or those local boards. Because these people are now not making just judgments on land use and parks and rec and things like that cities have always done, but now they're going to be making decisions on a lot of other things that are far more important that affect a much broader area. And whether it's labor markets or businesses, they don't really know city boundaries. They're much broader than that. And so something that one city does can impact themselves dramatically, impact their neighbors without that neighboring city having anything to do with it.
Interesting way you put it. When you think about your city government, first thing that comes to my mind is that damn pothole in front of my house. Who's going to fill it? You call the city. There are safety services, your fire department, your police department. These it's very service oriented. And you mentioned the stuff that we like about cities, the benefits that I don't think are required for a city to do, but is there a parks department? Is there a park and recs department? Are we going to put some art in the library? Those are all nice things. But I tell you, I don't want the guys in the city of Boulder dictating economic policy and property rights from their crazy little temporary part-time position. How often does your city council meet?
2 or 3 times a month, and then we sit on boards and commissions just like you we're talking about.
Yeah, but it's not, you don't have a 120-day session. This is not your full-time job. You're not immersed in this like a state legislator. But now city council members are going to have more power over economic decisions than ever before.
We can set prices, and they're always well-intentioned policies, but they come with unintended consequences too.
Like what?
Anytime you raise the minimum wage, then the employer is forced to make a number of decisions. They can cut some benefits, they can cut hours, they might even cut jobs. And that might be a good temporary boost, but that might circle around too.
But don't you want the authority in Broomfield to say, guess what? Everybody gets $50 an hour. You'd be very popular.
And we'd probably put plenty of businesses, they would have to close the doors. And we hear a lot that people like small businesses, locally owned shops, and they're usually the first ones to go. They operate on those razor-thin margins.
See, this is one of those problems, though, that when when you, in order to win an election at a city council, it's a lot easier than winning a state senate seat. Not that it's easy, but it's easier. And you want to please your constituents. And if more of them feel like, hey, taking some property rights is a good deal. Out of all the things that are now on your plate, you've got oil and gas regulations that you guys can get involved with. You've got minimum wage laws. You can ban tobacco and flavored whatever. You can change the age limits they're going to try to do. Tax increases for tobacco. All these things that were once not in your purview. What worries you the most out of all the things the state has now, quote, empowered you with?
The ones that worry me the most is the minimum wage thing currently does, and one that's probably coming, which is potentially rent control. That failed in the previous legislature, but I have no doubt that it will be back. And those are very dramatic changes in the way we do business. They're very impactful on our local economies and our economic systems. And having city councils decide that, some city councils I'd be more than comfortable them deciding those issues, but some I would not. And particularly, I think a sudden change like this has changed kind of who might be there on those city councils. And I think that's what worries me. We have our lane in local government. We really do 5 things. We do parks and rec, we do water and sewer, we do public safety, which is police departments, we do city services, which is land use and zoning, things like that you're used to out of cities, to all of a sudden give us the ability or responsibility for these broad economic policy issues. That's very worrisome to me.
Pardon me to be skeptical here and maybe conspiratorial. I see this as part of a much larger plan, which is to use cities to move the needle to a progressive collectivist mindset. I look at my hometown of the very tolerant, loving, diverse, and accepting, welcoming community that hates me because I own guns, putting in their gun laws. And I know that other cities are looking at that. The reason to do that is they know it's not going to be effective, they know it can't be enforced, but they hope other cities push it, and then it becomes a statewide issue. I can't believe that the Senate Bill 181, which gives you more power over oil and gas, was meant to strengthen oil and gas. No, this was a way for this community, and Broomfield, I think, is right in the center of that, to choke off oil and gas and then strangle it bit by bit. Tell me I'm wrong on this.
Well, whether
I want to be wrong on this. Just tell me I'm wrong.
Maybe on intent, but that's certainly the effect. Putting these issues at the local level, you tend to see competition there that's sparked, that the state governance kind of quelled. You could settle the issue there once, and everybody kind of had to obey. And now you have these battles going on at the local level over every issue. And those battles are even getting a bit more vitriolic, if you've noticed.
I haven't noticed any polarization whatsoever. I don't know what you're talking about. Both of you operate in the Denver metro area, and I'll be damned if I can figure out where the boundaries are for any real city. Boulder I get because they got the green belt and go, oh, now I'm in Boulder. You cross a street, you're in Edgewater, then you're in Lakewood, then you're in Littleton, right. You don't know. And so the idea that you'll be able to raise the minimum wage here, but the people that it affects actually live over here.
Right.
So they can live over here, but they're employed over here. If they get more money, that's terrific because they'll be able to spend it over here. They're not going to spend it in your place, and so it's going to get bizarre pretty fast.
Well, John, it's one of the things I really think is the worst part about this is there are certain things like labor markets that do not respect the boundaries of cities. You mentioned it very well that while one side of the street may have one minimum wage, the other side may have another, and the labor market is clearly bigger than most of our cities. And I think, this to me is an incremental approach to getting some things by the state legislature and the governor that they couldn't get statewide. I think you mentioned SB 181 was a perfect example. Prop 112 failed big, and yet a year later, essentially the same thing shows up.
Yeah, the fracking ban fails by a large margin of the state ballot, and something arguably worse passes through the legislature.
And there will be locales that will take that up and will implement what they weren't able to implement. I find it very interesting with this kind of doctrine of pushing stuff down to us localities. They're not doing it with everything, and I think if you're paying attention to the legislature this last year, the sex ed bill was a perfect example that takes away local control. It imposes a statewide solution on locales, and that's one where really the local control probably was much more appropriate. So I think they're being very choosy about how they implement this.
It is pretty fascinating. So when it comes to transsexual education, that is an important thing that we're going to take over statewide, and though we like local control for school boards, not that. It's also interesting that the power you guys have for, let's say, tobacco or minimum wage can only go up. You don't have local control. Local control means if you wanted to lower the minimum wage, you could do so. If you wanted to take away the tax on cigarettes, maybe even lower the age on cigarettes, you'd have the freedom to do it. No, you only have the ability to ratchet it up towards more government, more taxation, more regulation, more limitation of who can own these properties. That's not control. That's manipulation.
Yeah. A national popular vote is actually another example too. They took that away from us and passed the compact at the legislature on how our electors are selected. So I was a little bit disturbed by that one too. And yeah, it's a trend that don't like seeing. Certainly an inconsistency there.
Right. I mean, the idea is pretty clear. We'll let you have free control to have more government, not less, more regulation, not more. How did the cities, when this came up in the legislature, how did they go down to the Capitol and they said, we don't want this? Or did most of the cities say, yeah, give me the power?
You know, I think the cities are represented by an organization called Colorado Municipal League, and the Colorado Municipal League really looks at those things in a broad sense of more local control is good and mandates are bad. And so I think there's some desire for some of this local control by some cities. And I don't know that it's necessarily always bad either, but it is when it happens instantly, like it does at the end of a legislative session with a bill signing by the governor. I think there needs to be time for cities to be able to do these things the right way if they're going to do it at all. So was there any preparation? No, it just happened one day. And whoever's
like all good crimes, it just happened one day.
That's right. Whoever's on city council at that time gets that responsibility or those abilities to make their economy better or maybe make it dramatically worse. And that's, to me, the danger of it.
All right, well, let's finish it up on this thought. It used to be you care about these things, you better pay attention to your state races, who's going to represent you under the Gold Dome.
Right.
Most people have no idea who you guys are, and even in your own cities. I can name a few of my city council members, and since you're not partisan seats, it's even harder to know who you stand for. But these seats are more important than ever. People are scared by this, and they should be. What do you think they ought to do?
They ought to get involved and go to the candidate forums and ask the candidates their positions on things like minimum wage and tobacco regulation, and ask them the hard questions. What about the unintended consequences? See what they say.
You like the control. John, thank you. Thank you. Keep the wells going there, will you? Stay tuned.